Welcome back to the inaugural episode of Kiss My Glass. There was just so much good stuff to talk about in 1 hour, so we're continuing the conversation with Colby Chandler, Vice President and Specialty Brewer of Ballast Point. And if you don't know what we're talking about, make sure you go back and listen to the first half of the interview wherever you get your podcasts. Now, without further ado, we return to host Edwin Real of Eating and Drinking San Diego with Colby Chandler, who are in the midst of eating, drinking, and talking about beer at the Pacific Podcast Studio.
Colby, you're so cool. You're bringing food for us. You're bringing beer.
That's what I do. I'm a trained professional.
I really appreciate this. It's this all this consolation
Santana's
money.
Oh, yeah, that's what it is. That's why I went to Santana's and got a shrimp quesadilla. Just for you, yeah.
What are we drinking now?
Right now we're drinking Manta Ray Double IPA, gold medal winner at this year's GABF. Nice and juicy, nice and light, right in that 8.5% range. Great beer. Actually came out of the R&D program at Little Italy. So one of the few beers to move up through the ranks.
What do you actually do now? What's your daily Colby Chandler day at the office?
Luckily, I'm not in the office too much anymore. A lot of ambassadorship, a lot of beer dinners. I still brew down at Little Italy every once in a while by myself. I've done 13 collaboration brews this year, from Australia to Silva Brewing up in Paso to a bunch of guys in San Diego, South Park, North Park. About to brew with Pat McElhenney here in a couple weeks in Little Italy. And I head out to Tombstone to do a brewery, collaboration with a brewery out there in Arizona. So I'm just kind of all over the place, interviews, a lot of employee training now. We have the whole Roots to Boots program still, which is our employee training program down at Little Italy, which is great. 5 cross-departmental employees come in. We pay them to come in and brew for the day. They get to brew whatever they want to brew as a team. And then they get to sit at the bar and drink the beer and be proud like all the other brewers have been over the past 25 years of Ballast Point Homebrew Mart. So, I don't know. It's just kind of cool. I'm a little bit of everywhere. I have no direct reports, and I just kind of really just try to... I'm almost a historian now more than anything, and just trying to tell people about the stories of Ballast Point and where the beers came from, and a lot of what we're doing for the past hour here.
It's incredible.
Just in different arenas for the most part.
Different platforms.
Yeah, different platforms.
When you were the 8th person hired, how many barrels were you producing at that time compared to now? Do you know?
We were probably at about 600 barrels, 600 barrels in 1997.
Annual,
600. We probably started 396, 697. The big number is 2010. We won Champion Small Brewery at the World Beer Cup with Piper Down, Sculpin, and Fathom, and we were at 13,500 barrels in 2010. Last year we were close to 400,000 barrels.
Jeez! So you do that
6 years.
You do that in a week now.
Yeah, one fermenter.
Yeah.
Basically.
I remember the photos.
Yeah, not a week. It's a day for the most part, yeah.
I remember the photos of the barrels going, or, what are those called? The tanks going through. It passed by where I was living at the time in City Heights.
Oh, nice.
And I saw this massive convoy of all your tanks going through, and I'm like, man, this is crazy.
Yeah, it's amazing walking around the brewery and giving tours with people. It's seeing people's mouths wide open. And it's a huge brewery at Miramar, and then you can walk across the street, and we just installed a 40-barrel brew house and a huge sour facility. That's where we're doing sour wench and 6-packs, and then in that building is also where all the blending is being done for the High West and any other barrel-aged beers that we're doing in the future. So just kind of quietly opened up the largest sour facility on the West Coast.
Jeez. Just quietly.
Yeah,
Speaking of the future, what does the future hold for you?
I'm just going to keep continuing to do the same thing. I'm kind of having fun not being in charge of anybody. which is a position that you don't get in too many jobs. Again, I'm just trying to kind of go around and put people at ease a little bit, in the fact that I'm kind of the voice of those, 850 employees that are out there, grinding every day, and I'm just trying to give them as much credit as possible.
Are you set for life?
Am I set for life? I don't know. I was set for life 3 years ago.
Before the acquisition?
Yeah. I mean, you don't get in to brewing to make money necessarily, you know what I mean? Unless you're the owner of the brewery, basically. So,
and even then, you're.
I've always been passionate about the product. I grew up in the Seattle area. I have pictures of me drinking Olympia in the tasting room at 5 years old. My parents went to Rainier and Olympia; those were the local breweries. I remember going to Thomas Kemper when it was a garage in Poolsboro, and then they eventually sold AB and Bev. Red Hook back in the day, Trolleyman's Pub right across the street from where Browers is now. They reminded me a lot of Ballast Point back in those days too. So yeah, I mean I love the scene, I love the people, So
and I think a lot of people love you,
I'm already
Colby.
rich in many, many ways.
I think a lot of people love you, Colby. I mean, people.
It's a bad rumor.
But I mean, when I told people I was going to interview you, people were like, "Oh man, I love Colby." Like they were your friends, and I know they're not. They're acquaintances, and they don't know you. Like I don't know you, but you're a real open guy, and I appreciate your candor in this interview. Yeah. I appreciate your historical depth of talking about this whole scene. And I don't think a lot of people in town have the credentials you do. And so I'm very honored and flattered that, you sat down for an hour with me.
No, it's my honor. I feel like sometimes we get so full of ourselves, and we've really been catering to kind of the beer nerds for the past 20 years that we've almost kind of forgotten a little bit about the new generation of beer drinkers coming on. And I'm seeing a lot of same trends. I used to drink a lot of Pyramid Apricot Hefeweizen back in the day. Yeah. And 20 years later, we're drinking Grapefruit Sculpin. I used to drink a lot of Labatt's Blue and Moosehead and Steinlager back in the day.
I'm Canadian.
Now we're drinking Pivo Pils. You know what I mean? So it's the taste buds on the kind of bigger beer drinker are changing again. You know what I mean? I don't know if they've ever changed necessarily. A lot of the new generation rosés, right, are coming up, super popular, cocktails, things. I don't know if they necessarily want their dad's bitter beer anymore. So this pendulum, we're back to a 20-year pendulum again that we've already started swinging into. What's going to come up next? Brown ales? Pete's Wicked Brown Ale going to come out of mothballs, or Henry Weinhard's Dark Ale? I think hopefully podcasts like this will start to not only dive into the history and to the kind of beer geekiness, but also be a platform for people new getting into the beer and fresh beer and San Diego beer, and getting some sort of an understanding of why it's a scene and where they should go and drink and what they're drinking. And I think sometimes it's detrimental to be such a promiscuous drinker, especially if you're new to the beer scene, because you never have the same beer twice. So how do you know if it's good or bad? You go in and you just go, well, I don't like that beer from that brewery, so maybe I just don't, I don't know. Then they go to the next one, but they don't know why it's bad or what the brewery did to make it bad. And I think it just kind of keeps kind of repeating almost. Not necessarily repeating. It gives brewers sometimes an excuse to make inferior beers. And I think it's also kind of attacking the consumers in a way, too, that's not necessarily good.
All right, so we're drinking a Sour Wench, one of my favorites here.
Well, what did you think about the Habanero Sculpin?
Man,
the pairing
it paired perfectly with that quesadilla, the shrimp quesadilla. The crema actually kind of soothed the heat, and then the heat kind of comes back. you know,
Right, yeah,
and it stays on your lips.
Kind of lingering a little bit. But that's why you need another bite.
Yeah,
and the
totally.
shrimp and the caramel, like you said. And the bitterness cuts through the cheese, that's in the beer as well. So, no, that's
your
one of
first
my
rodeo.
Yeah, it's a fun pairing for me.
So now we're drinking Sour Wench, which is a blackberry ale.
This version is a blackberry sour ale. Yes, Kettle Sour.
Tell us about Kettle Sours. A lot of people who like sour beers are like, oh, we hate Kettle Sours.
Well, a lot of people just throw sours into one big lump category.
Yeah.
Kettle Sours are usually kind of bacteria-oriented, lactobacillus. Usually, most guys will do it either in the mash tun or the kettle. Most people do it in the kettle because it doesn't gum up the mash tun very much. It's a lot easier to deal with. And then this particular one, after we soured it in the kettle overnight, bring the pH down, then we boil it again, and that's when we add the hops into it. And then the Marion blackberries from Oregon get into the fermenter during fermentation, so you're getting some of the alcohol from the blackberries as well.
I had this at a beer festival recently, and there were so many hoppy beers that when you had this, it kind of was so refreshing on a warm day.
It's like that gin mule after a day at the beer fest, right?
Yeah, totally.
But you're in the beer fest. No, it's super bright. You know what I mean? It's almost like a lemonade kind of acidity is what I usually try to tell people, This was originally a homebrew that we made for the Southern California Homebrewers Festival way back in the day. Probably made it for that 5 or 6 years before it got into the Ballast Point rotation. And back in the day, it was called Marion Berries, named after the berries that we're using, but also after the Washington mayor. So it's called Marion Berries, better than a crack whore lambic is what we called it when it was a homebrew. So that morphed into Sour Wench to get it through the TTB.
We're getting looser and looser as beers are flowing here at the Pacific Studios.
None in the studio yet.
What's next? What are you brewing now?
This was a silver medal at the GABF, by the way.
A silver?
Silver medal.
Wow.
Yeah, no gold awarded.
Why not?
Because this beer, my guess is that you have a style guideline in front of you, right? And you're trying to find the beer out of all the flights that you're doing that best fits that style guideline to a T. So my guess would be that the judges felt that Sour Wench didn't fit the style guideline to a T, but it was the best beer in the flights that were given to them.
Okay.
So, it was the only category. They usually 1 or 2 categories a year that they don't give a gold to, and that's just coming straight from the beer judges that are judging that category.
I went to Bar Sin Nombre. Have you heard of that place?
Oh, yeah. I've known Tony forever.
Yeah, Tony Razzo, it's a passion project of his because it's been 3 years in the making.
It's been longer than that.
Right. It's probably been in his head forever.
He's been thinking of that when he was in Hawaii even.
Yeah, and so Tony opened up last week during Beer Week, and I went there on Monday, and this is the kind of beer that would be there. I don't know if it's going to be there.
It better be there.
It better be there.
Let's call him right now.
Tony. Hey, Tony.
No, Tony's been a huge fan of Ballast Point for years. He's helped get us into Hawaii back in the day. Big fans back in the La Bella Pizza days, and he was fully doing all the beer buying down there as well. So, yeah, we've known him for years, and he has a beautiful family, and he's just a great guy.
And right now, I've never had Cantillon on draft. They had it the other day, which was stunning. And I think they blew that keg in less than 2 hours. I mean,
and all the bottles. I saw the picture of all the bottles cleaned out.
It's so crazy, right? I mean, it's great that it's down there. And we were talking about beer deserts. Chula Vista went from being a beer desert 2 years ago to now having 5 or 6 beer destinations on 3rd Avenue alone. This is, the kind of thing that I think is going to help Chula Vista grow as a food destination as well. I mean, as you know, I'm more of a food guy than a beer person, but this is going to bring
beer is food.
Beer is food. This is going to bring food down there as well.
Yeah, no, it'll bring all kinds of things that you wouldn't even think of. Yeah, you just bring traffic to any area, it's going to change. It's going to morph.
Where do you vacation?
Mostly in breweries and bars.
Yeah, you can write that all off, right?
I went to high school in Hawaii and a little bit of college, and I spent 11 years on Oahu. And so for me, it's kind of like going back to your favorite beer. You know, you're getting, the value of it, and you don't mind revisiting it, as many times as possible. So Hawaii is my favorite place to go.
What are some good breweries in Hawaii?
I like Big Island Brew House. They're doing fun stuff. They've been doing a lot of cool stuff for a while. Garrett at Maui does an amazing job. I've gave that coconut porter medals a lot of times over the years as I've judged contests and things.
Garrett,
what is it? Labworks? I think it's called Labworks on Oahu. A bunch of young guys are doing a bunch of fun stuff. Honolulu Beer Works is doing an amazing job. The scene's definitely growing over there. They got Beer Week now. They've got, their yearly festival and all that good stuff. So it's coming along.
We've referenced a few times in this interview St. Archer's. Kim went over there from St. Archer, right, too?
She was running the brew house at the brew pub, and then I think came over here and worked at St. Archer, and now has gone back to Maui. I'm not 100% positive on that, but I think that's the way Kim's destinations have gone.
Her partner, Heather, is one of my favorite roasters, and we were saddened as a coffee community when she left, and she was at Bird Rock.
Power couple.
Yeah, the power couple.
Yeah. They make good liquid.
Yeah,
both of them.
Speaking of liquid, I was at a place called Kova. It's down on 400 West Broadway here in downtown San Diego, and their roaster, his name is Matt Higgins. I asked him, why San Diego for your first out of Portland location? And his take was very enlightening. He said that, San Diego's not really known for having a food culture, but man, do we know liquids, right? And that your comment there kind of triggered that,
right.
Where, man, we have a couple of really fantastic coffee roasters here. We have spirits now, and an offshoot of
cider.
13
cideries, I think.
Yeah,
in San Diego now.
meads, and so we might not necessarily
13 hop growers in San Diego now.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's a hop growing guild, I believe now.
Yeah, and so here we are, not getting a lot of love when it comes to food nationwide, but our liquid scene is very strong.
So we're hydrators, is that what you're saying?
We're hydrators in a desert.
It's a coastal desert, and we're a bunch of hydrators.
Right. Funny how that works, right? What are the challenges of beer moving forward in the next few years to you?
I think it's going to be getting back to the basics. I think it's about not only catering, to the nerds out there, but also catering to the other 85% of people and getting more and more of those into the fold. Whether it's us charging the way, hitting markets that aren't normally hit with Sculpin IPAs or anything else, and having that kind of trickle down to everybody else, or just continuing to just do one-on-ones and beer dinners and getting in front of people and getting them to taste this. I think it's the biggest challenge for any brewery anywhere, including San Diego, is to get people to taste the beer. So it's not about going to a beer festival and trying to pour your beer out by 2 o'clock so you can get the fuck out of there. You know what I mean? It's about going in and pouring until the very end so everybody gets to try your beer, and eventually they go out and purchase it or look for it or become passionate about it.
And a lot of times when we go to these beer festivals, and I've gone to several just last week alone, what we drink a lot of are core beers, and that's all fine, but for a lot of people, we've had this. It's no longer something special, where some of the better festivals, they're actually pouring some whales out there, beers that you just don't normally see on draft, or just don't really get the chance to drink. What's your philosophy when you're pouring at these events?
I mean, you're talking about two different consumers, right? Two different events. I think you got to have both. You got to have something that's approachable to the new beer drinker, because ultimately, I mean, there's there's not a more economical way to try beer than to going to a beer festival, right? To go through and try stuff, and if you actually made notes, then I can actually feel comfortable about going and buying that product for $10 or $15 a six-pack on the shelf. It's kind of a gamble, it kind of reminds me a lot of wine, in the mid 80s, and the proliferation of Napa wines and everything became so confusing for all the new wine drinkers that they just kind of fell away from it. It was just I don't even want to deal with it. Kind of seeing a lot of that in the same way. What was the question? I had another.
It doesn't matter. Here we are. We're going to drink probably the one I'm most excited about of your 5 beers that you brought here, which is the High West Barrel-Aged Victory at Sea. Walk us through this. What are we drinking here? Tell us some notes.
Victory at Sea, we've been doing for about 11 years now. We wanted to do a winter seasonal so that when you saw your breath in San Diego and you knew it was winter, you would start kind of searching out for this beer. So we usually release this kind of right around San Diego Beer Week in November, late October. We work with a local coffee roaster, Cafe Calabria on 30th Street. We have since day one with this coffee, or with this beer, even before. We had it at a few beers before Victory until it found a home here. And there's a little bit of vanilla in there to kind of go into that winter seasonal, usually some sort of a spice in there, an ingredient. So fortunately, one of our family members at Constellation is High West, and they do some amazing whiskeys and ryes.
Really
and
comes out.
All kinds of different things. And we're able to not only get the barrels from them, but get the barrels in the quantity that we want and get them super fresh and wet. So we're still aging this beer for 6 to 8 months in the barrels before blending them all together and packaging them up in 4-packs for $14.99. Amazing new label by our artist Paul Elder, kind of revamping the Victory at Sea label there a little bit.
Paul's been with you from
day one, pretty much, since the Yellowtail label back in the day,
Here's what I like about this. We were talking earlier about it being $14.99 and how you can store it. Part of my thing is, do these beer drinkers who buy beer, shelve it, do they actually know what it tastes like new and how it ages, or how do we know?
How do you find out about that? That's a great question. I mean, I know, I forget which brewery was actually doing, it might have been Sierra Nevada. I feel like they were doing updates every year on how the beer was coming along, so you could go reference it a little bit. Generally with Victory at Sea, I'm well familiar with this since I made this recipe 11 years ago, and I've been saving beers ever since. So I feel like right around that 7-year mark is kind of where it peaks. 7, 8 years before it kind of starts to get a little bit flabby and some of the flavors kind of fall off. The cold brewing of the coffee that we do with this makes it super stable over time. The 10% alcohol obviously helps with the stabilization. There's no big hop characters in here, so there's nothing real volatile to fall off. And even the vanilla actually kind of hangs out for a little bit, even over a long amount of time. And then you add the barrel aging to it, and you're just going to add a lot more complex kind of sherry notes and things with the oxygen that's in this bottle as well, too. So, I don't know. I mean, just like wine, you think about the acids. The longer you age the wine, the softer the acids get. And it's a lot of the same way in the beer as well. So whether it's Barmy Ale or Victory at Sea or Sea Monster or any of these kind of rich, non-hoppy beers, they can all be laid down and cellared.
And when
I think they just get softer almost and more rounded, and ultimately maybe even a little bit more balanced. I think that's the challenge, is figuring out which year it's the most balanced. Whether it's 3 years, 4 years, 7 years, kind of a thing.
So,
and that might just be a personal taste.
Walk me through this. I get a bottle of this. It's a 4-pack. I get it at any grocery store. I drink one here, and how do I store the other 3 that I want to kind of keep for a couple of years?
I try to find the coolest spot in the house, whether it's a a closet or a closet in the garage that's next to the concrete or something like that. But when I've aged beers both cold, for 7 years and warm for 7 years, and they're both right on. I think the cold could probably go another couple years just because it's a lot slower, aging process basically on that. But I wouldn't not keep the beers if I didn't have a proper cellaring area. Obviously, if you're going to keep it at 120 degrees for 2 years, that's just going to increase the aging process faster.
So you want it to be stable temperature,
cool. You know what I mean? Yeah. I've mostly kept them in a closed closet in my garage, kind of, like I said, close to the floor as possible.
Because you don't want that fluctuation of getting warm then cool at night, warm then cool at night.
Ideally, no. But I've also found that those beers that I've kept that way and has fluctuated through summer and winter, still okay. They're still okay. And I think it goes back to the quality beer that we're making. You know what I mean? We're getting these beers into the bottles with the least amount of oxygen that we can possibly do that's picked up during packaging, which ultimately leads to those types of shelf lives. And those 300 test points that we do on each beer that the lab does. And we have one of the most advanced labs on the West Coast now. We can get down to the genes on beers.
Wow.
Basically. So all of that kind of lends into the shelf life of any of our beers, whether it's the hoppy or the 7-year-old barrel-aged High West Victory at Sea.
I'm sure you walk around and you go to, tasting rooms, you go to breweries, and you're Colby. They'll give you a beer to try out. For some of us who are not Colby, where do we get beer? Who treats beer? What bottle shops treat beer with respect to your standards as a brewer?
You can't. There's 156 places in town that you should go drink beer at.
Yeah,
it's the breweries. You go to the breweries and you talk to the people that make them, and you talk to the bartenders that has studied those beers and are able to talk about them and don't mind giving you samples here and there of things. You bring them in a beer that maybe they can't get, or is a home brew of yours or something like that. That usually opens up the floodgates of information and sharing as well. So we have such a resource with all these local breweries that are making fresh beer on premises that's all we ever looked for 20 years ago, and it still should be an important place to go first if you're wanting to try something.
When tasting rooms and breweries first opened, I used to always be supporting. I still do, but I used to love supporting them because the beer was $5 a taste, a pint. Now they're coming up on $7, $8. Some of them are $9 a pint at the source. Well, how did that happen?
Kind of goes back to your Karen question a little bit too, and the fact that we always priced our beer over the price of what you could get it at the store down the street because we didn't want to compete with those guys. Obviously, cost of goods have gone up.
Labor. All
of those things tend to get passed on a little bit. And I also think it's the threshold, too, of the consumer. And I think you're seeing that change a little bit now, that, maybe that $8 pint doesn't have the value, that it used to. I also feel like there's beer drinkers that don't necessarily change their price point. They buy a $10 six-pack,
it doesn't matter
10 years ago, and they look for the $10 six-pack now.
Right.
So I think whereas we thought, and especially one of the amazing things about Sculpin is when we started packaging Sculpin in six-packs 10 years ago, it was $15 a six-pack.
Today?
$15 a six-pack. Our idea was kind of always that we would hopefully lead the pack and everybody would kind of come up to that price point. But I don't think any of us saw 156 breweries to compete with, when we were making Sculpin and pricing it at that 10 years ago. So now the proliferation of breweries and the consumer, I think, is what's going to eventually kind of drop that price a little bit. I think that $8 pint's either going to plateau or eventually get a little bit less.
So let's talk about those consumers. And we don't want to alienate them because they're your bread and butter. When you see these beer nerds who we both know have pushed craft beer into a more mainstream audience, but these are the same nerds, geeks, aficionados that are actually somewhat detrimental to the growth of beer, because now they're pigeonholing you into, you got to be this or that or the other. Can you talk about that?
I mean, it's a slippery slope, right? To drink with your morals instead of your palate. I feel like sometimes, ultimately, I think everybody is trying to do the right thing. You know what I mean? They're trying to put out the right information. They're concerned about people drinking the right beer, and they know enough about it that they want to share their knowledge. You know what I mean? And it's hard to deny that and not appreciate it in many levels. But at the same time, I think when we start to shift to who makes it and independence and all of these buzzwords that are kind of around to, knock down bigger companies, you lose the sight of the beer a little bit.
And it's all about the beer.
Whole point of drink it if it's good. I would love I never mock anybody that comes up to me and says, I hate Sculpin. You know what I mean? Like, why do you hate it? And I'll talk through it, and I'm like, oh, that's awesome. That's cool. Well, maybe you should try this beer or something, Like, thank you for saying you hate it because you don't like it. But it takes a lot of salt to have somebody come up to me and go, I don't drink your beer because who owns you? And it's like, wow, that's a horrible way to consume beer, or to think about consuming beer. Or anything. It's just, at some point, you're going to suffer by what you're allowed to and not allowed to consume, and you're kind of pushing that. So I don't know. Again, I understand the passion behind it. I'm right there. I'm just as passionate, but I just hope that at some point people realize that, I'm still passionate about Ballast Point for many, many good reasons.
When we, as a community, start embracing our history, who has brought us to where we are, what beers are kind of legacy beers in San Diego, and enjoy it for what it is. I don't drink Arrogant Bastard, for example, but I appreciate the importance of Arrogant Bastard as a beer and as an attitude. It was probably my first craft beer that I drank in San Diego, and even though I don't drink it now and I find it a little bit too hopped up, there's no denying who they are, their importance, and let's embrace it. We're all in this together as a city, as an industry, and there comes a time when a Corona on the beach in Mexico is just as good as drinking this Victory at Sea in front of you is.
All beers have a time and a place to enhance the moment that you're drinking them in.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. It's yeah.
When you were doing a quick fire earlier and you said something about the best beer is the one that enhances the moment, I really appreciate that.
Yeah,
because that's what it is. And I could be at Livewire and drink a banquet beer, and it is the
that's
right.
What you do.
That's the right thing. Right. Colby, what a fantastic interview I think this was, and I really appreciate you taking the time, bringing these treats, sharing your knowledge, setting the historical precedent here on this new podcast. And I'm so honored that I talked to you on Friday. 6 days later, here you are, imparting your knowledge. And let's continue the conversation online. Let's continue the conversation in a future date. I want to touch base with you in a year and kind of go, hey, where are we now? And I think you're such an important person and such a great ambassador to not only Ballast Point, but beer in San Diego. It's a common appreciation for the city.
I'm beer proud. I'm San Diego beer proud.
Yeah, and that's where we are.
Yeah. And let's cheers to fresh beer made in San Diego.
Cheers. Thank you very much, Colby. Colby Chandler with Ballast Point. He is the vice president, whatever that means now, and he's also the specialty brewer.
VIP brewer, historian, ambassador, lots of hats.
Walking encyclopedia of San Diego beer knowledge. Go to Ballast Point. Support them. I don't care who you are, what you do. This is important. These guys have really done a great service to the industry, have launched careers, have launched great beers, and I hope after talking and listening to this podcast, you understand better and, stop drinking with your morals and start drinking with your palate, people.
Hey San Diego, I'm Leslie Hackett, Editor-in-Chief at Pacific Magazine. If it's the fourth Monday of the month, then it's time to celebrate those San Diego beverage purveyors that keep your glass topped off year after year. Barrel Republic in Pacific Beach turns 4, Amplified Ale Works hits 5 years, and Green Flash recently celebrated 15 years. If you know a drink-related business celebrating an anniversary or other milestone, let us know. Send emails to leslie@pacificsandiego.com. And now, a roundup of drink events to watch out for in San Diego in the month of December. A speakeasy in a grocery store? That's the idea behind backroom beer pairings with Temecula-based brewer Black Market from 6 to 8 p.m. on December 13th at all 7 Barron's Southern California locations. Proceeds from the events will benefit the San Diego and Temecula food banks. From here to there to here, crawl around downtown and Little Italy during 12 Bars of Charity. Ticket sales help support 8 local charities, including the Pacific-featured Big Josh Foundation. Information at 12barsofcharity.com. That's the number 12, barsofcharity.com. Ballast Point is hosting a day-long party in honor of its Imperial Porter, Victory at Sea. At each of the brewery's 7 locations, including the East Coast, at least 15 varieties of the brew will be tapped. Tickets are $30 and can be purchased at ballastpoint.com under the Events tab. If there's a drink event worth filling San Diegans' calendars, let me know. Drop an email to leslie@pacificsandiego.com and be sure to check pacificsandiego.com online for more cool events to keep you busy all year long. Thank you for listening to Kiss My Glass, a collaboration between Pacific Magazine and Facebook group Eating and Drinking San Diego. Thirsty for more? Be sure to sign up for this podcast and the food-forward Dish It Up, which hits airwaves on the second Monday of the month.